I have to say, looking at the stack of research we have for today, I feel like we are careening all over the place.
Yeah, it's a bit of a wild ride today.
It really is. I mean, we are bouncing between high-concept science fiction and literally literal carpentry. We've got a paper from Nature claiming the robot uprising already happened and we just missed it.
Which is quite the claim.
Right. And then we have the CEO of DeepMind telling us reality is a simulation.
Basically, yeah.
And then a self-hosted tool for transcribing your Zoom meetings. And finally, a literal block of wood orbiting the Earth. It's a true tech potpourri for you today.
It does look totally disjointed at first glance, but there is actually a very specific thread tying all these sources together for you. We're looking at this idea of redefinition.
Redefinition. Okay.
Yeah. Technology is currently forcing us to redefine these categories we thought were completely solid. We are redefining intelligence because of large language models. We're redefining privacy because of the cloud.
And I guess we're redefining high-tech materials by realizing that sometimes the magnolia tree is actually better than titanium.
Exactly. Challenging the default settings.
I can definitely get behind that. So let's start with the biggest default setting we have right now, which is our own intelligence. I mean, we've been hearing about AGI for, what, decades now?
Artificial general intelligence, yeah.
Right. And the assumption is always that we will definitely know when it arrives because it's going to look like a god. It'll be HAL 9000 or Skynet.
That is the popular image you always see in movies. But this new paper in Nature by Eddie Kemming Chen and his colleagues, they argue that we're just looking for the wrong thing.
Okay.
They are dropping a bit of a bombshell here. They think AGI is arguably already here.
We're already here.
Yeah, we just refuse to admit it because of this phenomenon called the AI effect.
Oh, I've heard of this. Is this the idea that as soon as a computer can actually do a specific task, we just suddenly stop calling it intelligence?
Precisely. It's often attributed to Larry Tesler, the computer scientist. He basically said intelligence is whatever the machine hasn't done yet.
Right, so the goalposts just keep moving.
Always. I mean, in the 1950s, we said chess was the absolute pinnacle of human intellect. Then Deep Blue beats Kasparov, and suddenly we decided, well, chess is just brute force calculation. It's not real thinking.
Right, it's just math.
Exactly. Then it was art, then it was poetry. Now that frontier models are doing those things, we're just moving the goalposts again.
But that feels like a really convenient way to win the argument, though.
Yeah.
You just lower the bar until the robot can step over it.
Well, Chen argues it's not about lowering the bar at all. It's about accurately defining what the bar actually is. The problem is we are confusing general intelligence with universal intelligence.
Meaning what exactly?
Universal intelligence would be that godlike entity you mentioned. Perfect at math coding, empathy strategy, it never makes a single mistake. But if you look at humans...
We're definitely not that.
Right. You possess general intelligence. But if I asked you to perform open heart surgery today, or solve a complex quantum physics equation, you would fail.
Disastrously. Please do not ask me to do either of those things.
Right. But does that mean you lack intelligence?
No, it just means I'm not specialized in that.
Exactly. It means your intelligence is general, not universal. The authors argue that if we define AGI as intelligence that encompasses the human range...
Which includes our flaws.
Yes, our flaws, our gaps in knowledge, our inconsistencies. If that's the metric, then current frontier models essentially fit the bill. I mean, chatbots are now passing the Turing test. They're being identified as human more often than actual humans in some tests.
That is wild. But here is where I always get stuck with this. The skepticism I see most often is the stochastic parrot argument.
Oh yeah, the autocomplete argument.
Right, the idea that these models don't actually understand anything. They were just predicting the next word based on statistics.
Yeah.
They're just a super advanced autocomplete.
Yeah.
If they are just mimicking their training data, that's not real intelligence, is it?
The paper addresses this head-on, actually. The parrot argument relies entirely on the idea that the AI is only regurgitating what it has seen before.
Right.
But the sources indicate we are now seeing these models solve completely novel problems, specifically in math and physics, problems that simply do not exist anywhere in their training data.
So they aren't just looking up the answer in some massive database.
No. If you give a frontier model a brand new logic puzzle that has never been written down before, and it solves it using a step-by-step chain of reasoning that is not regurgitation.
That implies some kind of internal model of the world.
Exactly. It implies transfer learning, taking a concept from one specific domain and successfully applying it to another. That ability to generalize is the very hallmark of intelligence.
Okay, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. They still lie.
The hallucinations.
Yeah, we call them hallucinations to be polite, but Let's be real, they make stuff up.
Yeah.
The source mentions GPT-5 or similar future models having a hallucination rate of around maybe 10%.
Right.
If I hired a human consultant and he lied to me 10% of the time, I wouldn't call him intelligent. I'd call him a massive liability.
It's a fair point. But this brings us right back to the comparison with human biology. Human memory is notoriously unreliable.
That's true.
We have severe cognitive biases, we create false memories, we get facts wrong with absolute confidence. The author suggests that hallucinations don't disqualify an AI from being intelligent, they just prove it is an imperfect intelligence.
Just like us.
Just like us. We are demanding the AI be a flawless logic engine, but we are comparing it to messy biological brains.
So you're saying our anthropocentrism is blinding us.
Well, we
basically want the AI to be significantly better than us before we granted the title of equal.
Precisely. And while we sit around debating these definitions, the actual capabilities are just skyrocketing, which leads us perfectly into the next topic today.
Right, the implications of all this intelligence. We have this fascinating breakdown of an interview with Demis Hassabis, the CEO of Google DeepMind. And this was analyzed by Julian Cadeau.
Hassabis is such a fascinating figure.
He really is. He isn't your typical Silicon Valley hype man. He's a neuroscientist, a chess prodigy he used to design video games. He feels much more like a ground-level researcher than a CEO.
He does. And because of that background, his perspective is very grounded in the actual science, not just the stock price. He actually thinks the current AI bubble is a bit of a distraction.
Which is a crazy thing for the head of DeepMind to say.
Yeah, he believes AI is overhyped in the short term with all the financial bubbles, but drastically underhyped in the long term.
Underhyped. How is that even possible?
Yeah.
It's quite literally all anyone talks about right now.
Because he sees it as a species mutation.
A species mutation? That's heavy.
He compares the coming shift to the Industrial Revolution, but suggests it will be 10 times bigger and happen 10 times faster. We aren't just building a better physical tool like a scheme engine. We are outsourcing the very thing that makes us the dominant species.
Our cognition.
Our cognition.
The part of the interview that really threw me for a loop, though, was his concept of the computable universe. This sounds straight out of the Matrix.
It is a profound scientific view. Hassabis basically believes that, at its core, the entire universe is fundamentally just information processing. Physics, biology, chemistry, it is all just data.
I can sort of see that for physics, right?
Sure.
Atoms bouncing off each other, interacting. But what about subjective experience? What about the feeling of the wood desk under my hand? Or the frustration I feel when I'm stuck in traffic?
Hassabis would say yes, that too. Your brain is ultimately a biological machine processing input signals from your nervous system. It is information.
Okay.
And if it is information, it is computable. That means a Turing machine, a sufficiently powerful computer, can theoretically replicate it perfectly.
So everything can be simulated.
He says nobody has found anything in the universe that is not computable so far.
That is a very cold way to look at reality.
Yeah.
It kind of strips the magic out of consciousness. If our deepest feelings are just code, then we really are just moist robots.
It is a cold view, but it is also incredibly powerful. Because if the universe is entirely computable, it means AI can eventually solve anything.
Anything at all.
Curing cancer, solving fusion energy, understanding the very origin of life. These are no longer mysteries, they are just data problems. And if we build an intelligence far greater than ours, it will solve them.
Which brings us to the economic fallout of all this. Because if this mutation actually happens and the AI solves scarcity...
Right, if we have unlimited fusion energy and robots doing all the physical labor.
Exactly. Hassabis starts talking about the actual end of money.
This is where he really puts on his philosopher hat. He suggests that things we talk about now, like universal basic income, are just a temporary patch for the transition period.
Band-Aid.
Yeah. In a true post-scarcity world, money loses its fundamental meaning because you don't actually need it to survive anymore.
So what replaces it?
He throws out these radical ideas like voting with credits to allocate local resources.
Explain that a bit. Voting with credits.
Okay, imagine a world where traditional work is completely optional. You automatically have food, shelter, and energy provided. But maybe your local community wants to build a new park or host a massive festival.
Right.
You would use your credits, which are perhaps earned through social contribution or community reputation, to vote on how those shared resources are used. It represents a complete restructuring of human value.
It sounds utopian, but also honestly terrifying. Because the question quickly becomes what we actually do.
Yeah.
If I don't have to work to feed my family and the AI writes better novels than me and creates better art than me, Who am I?
That is the defining existential crisis of the 21st century. Hassabis asks, what is the meaning of life when the historical struggle for survival is just completely removed?
We lose our main drive.
We might have to move from a society of doing things to a society of simply being.
A society of being. I am definitely going to need to sit with that for a while. But unfortunately for us, we are not quite in the post-scarcity utopia yet.
Back to the real world.
Right. We are still very much in the I have to work for a living and deal with incredibly annoying administrative tasks phase of human history.
Specifically, the drudgery of endless meetings.
Yes, endless meetings. I read this piece by Corbin about a new tool called Scriber, and it felt like an absolute lifeline for anyone who is even mildly paranoid about their digital privacy.
Paranoia is the right word, but honestly, it is completely justified right now. Think about it. Most people are using cloud AI for transcription.
Right, you record a meeting and you upload it to Otter or Fireflies or whatever.
Exactly. But you are uploading highly sensitive company strategy or personal legal discussions or whatever it is to a server owned by a third party.
And we all know those terms of service usually have some buried clause that allows them to use your private data to train their future models.
Or at the very least, the data is sitting there vulnerable to a breach. Scriber completely flips that model. It is a self-hosted solution.
Meaning it stays on your computer.
Yes. It's open source software you install locally. Your audio file never leaves your laptop.
But usually when you hear run locally, it translates to you need a $10,000 supercomputer. Can a normal everyday laptop actually handle this?
That is the beauty of how hyper-efficient these specific models have become recently. Scriber uses NVIDIA Parakeet and the Whisper models. It is incredibly optimized.
Okay.
If you have a decent graphics card, a GPU, it is blazing fast. But even if you just run it on a standard CPU, it works perfectly fine. It is just a bit slower to process.
And what about the actual quality? Because usually open source implies it might be a bit clunky or inaccurate compared to the big tech versions.
Not in this case. Whisper is considered state-of-the-art. In fact, because you can tweak the parameters yourself, it often handles heavy accents and specific technical jargon way better than the expensive paid cloud services. And it also includes diarization.
Diarization. That is the fancy technical word for distinguishing between different speakers.
Right. It automatically splits the text. Speaker A said this, speaker B said that. But the absolute killer feature for me is its integration with Ollama.
Oh, I love Ollama. For those listening who might not know, Ollama is that tool that lets you run large language models like Llama 3 or Mistral locally on your own machine.
Yes, exactly. So Scriber doesn't just hand you a giant unreadable wall of text. It lets you actually chat with your transcript.
That is so useful.
You can just type in, hey, did we discuss the Q3 marketing budget? Or please list all the action items assigned to Phil today. And the local AI scans the text and just gives you the answer instantly.
And again, absolutely none of this goes to the cloud. OpenAI doesn't see it. Google doesn't see it.
It is a total privacy bunker. It is a perfect example of the technology pendulum swaying back the other way. We went from everything must be in the cloud to, wait a minute, maybe I actually want my second brain safely on my own hard drive.
It really empowers the user to keep their intellectual property actually private. I appreciate that shift. It's a small, practical tool, but it represents a huge shift in data control.
Absolutely.
Okay, speaking of massive shifts, we are going to pivot one last time today. We've talked about redefining digital brains and building privacy bunkers. Now I want to talk about a 10-centimeter box made of magnolia wood.
Lignosat. This is such a delightful and weird story.
Sounds like a complete joke when you first hear it. A wooden satellite, developed by Kyoto University and Sumitomo Forestry. My immediate reaction was, space is incredibly hard. Space is violent. Why on earth are we sending lumber into orbit?
It does sound completely counterintuitive. We naturally associate space travel with aerospace-grade aluminum, titanium, gold foil. But it turns out wood has properties that are actually uniquely suited for the vacuum of space.
I would assume it would just immediately burn up or rot away.
Well, think about what actually causes wood to rot on Earth.
Moisture, bacteria, fungi.
Right. And none of that exists in space.
Yeah.
And think about what causes fire. Oxygen. Oh, right. There is no oxygen.
Exactly. So the wood simply doesn't degrade. It is incredibly stable up there.
Okay, so it survives. But is it actually better than metal? Because surviving isn't the same as being the optimal material.
In some very specific ways, yes, it is better. The temperature swings in low Earth orbit are absolutely brutal. You go from positive 120 degrees Celsius in direct sunlight to negative 120 degrees in the shade every 90 minutes.
That is intense.
Metal expands and contracts wildly with those massive swings. That constant thermal stress can warp the structures or crack delicate internal sensors. Wood, on the other hand, has a natural cellular structure that just absorbs that stress. It is extremely dimensionally stable.
So a literal tree is actually better engineered for thermal shock than aerospace aluminum.
Nature had a head start on the engineering.
That is wild. But I read that the main motivation for this project isn't just structural stability, it is actually an environmental mission. Yes, and this is the scary part of the space industry we almost never discuss. We are currently launching thousands and thousands of satellites. Starlink, Kuiper, all these mega constellations. Yeah. And when those satellites reach the end of their lives, they fall back down and re-enter the atmosphere and burn up.
Which we usually think of as a good thing, right? Yeah. We think, oh, great, they burned up space junk, problem solved.
We used to think that. But they don't just magically vanish into nothingness. They actually vaporize into a fine mist of alumina, which are aluminum oxide particles.
And where does that go?
It just hangs there in the stratosphere.
Yeah.
These metallic particles act like millions of tiny mirrors. They reflect sunlight, they alter the delicate thermal balance of the upper atmosphere, and they can even actively damage the ozone layer.
Wow.
We are accidentally geoengineering our own planet with a layer of metallic space smog.
That is terrifying. So we are fixing the low Earth orbit space junk problem, but actively poisoning the upper atmosphere in the process. And the wood somehow solves this.
Completely solves it. When lignosat re-enters and burns up, it just produces water vapor and a tiny bit of carbon dioxide. It is totally organic. It is a completely clean burn.
That is absolutely brilliant. It is basically the leave no trace philosophy, but applied to orbital mechanics. And there was one other detail in the source that I found just fascinating. The way they actually built the box. They didn't use any screws or glue, right?
No glue at all, because in the extreme vacuum of space, synthetic glues can outgas. They essentially boil off and create this microscopic cloud of vapor that can easily fog up sensitive camera lenses or ruin sensors.
So how was it held together?
They used a technique called sashimono.
That is the traditional Japanese wood joinery.
Yes. It's the exact same technique master craftsmen used to make samurai furniture or massive wooden temples without a single metal nail. Yeah. Just incredibly intricate interlocking wooden joints.
That is a beautiful paradox.
It really is. To solve the absolute most futuristic problem we have, which is atmospheric space pollution, they went backward to a craftsmanship technique that is hundreds of years old.
High-tech literally meets ancient tech.
And the vision gets even more sci-fi from there. The researchers behind this aren't just thinking about cleaning up Earth orbit. They are openly talking about eventually planting trees on the moon or Mars.
Wait, a literal forest on Mars?
Think about the pure logistics of interplanetary colonization. Hauling massive steel girders all the way from Earth to Mars is incredibly heavy and financially ruinous.
Right. The launch cost would be astronomical.
But if you can just bring a handful of seeds, you can plant a forest inside a biodome. The trees naturally produce oxygen for the human colonists to breathe. Then you sustainably harvest that timber to build your habitats and your future satellites.
It becomes a self-sustaining organic industrial base.
Exactly.
That is a vision of the future I can really get behind. It is so much more hopeful than the cold, sterile, metallic cyberpunk future we usually imagine in sci-fi.
It really ties the whole episode's theme together beautifully.
It really does. We started with that Nature paper, redefining our own intelligence, and realizing maybe we aren't so unique. We looked at Scriber, which is about reclaiming our digital privacy from the big cloud machines. And finally, Lignosat, redefining space technology itself by looking backward to nature.
It is a great reminder that progress isn't always a straight technical line. Sometimes true progress means realizing that a messy human brain, flaws and all, is still the ultimate benchmark. Or that a simple piece of wood is actually smarter than a complex piece of aluminum.
And it brings us right back to that haunting thought from Demis Hassabis. If the universe really is just information, just pure data, then it deeply matters how we choose to arrange that data, whether it is in an artificial neural network, a private transcription log, or the intricate grain of a magnolia tree.
The ultimate question we are left with is, are we just the biological bootloader for whatever synthetic intelligence comes next? Or can we somehow integrate all these things, the AI, the wood, the privacy, into a future that is still distinctly human?
Are we the bootloader? That is an equally terrifying and exhilarating note to end on for you to mull over. I am personally going to go outside, stare at a tree, and just appreciate its non-computable beauty for a little while.
That sounds like a very solid plan.
If you enjoyed this deep dive, please remember the title. Le podcast de Philippe. Help us reach 2,000 subscribers, and please share our podcast with your friends.